Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 47, and today we are continuing the journey through The Price of Freedom by A.C. Crispin. If you have not listened to the last episode, I highly recommend you do, as I explained a lot of the background about the book, and we went through the first 4 chapters as well. Also, I just want to say I did not expect the last episode to be 2 hours and 20 minutes long. I was shocked when I finished recording that because that was only covering the first 4 chapters, and I don't know if this episode will be as long as that one, but I guess I'll find out after I'm done recording this, so obviously you will all know already. But anyway, last time we got a bit of background on Zerzura and the legends surrounding it, along with some information about the rogue pirates that are currently plaguing the seas. This issue has captured the attention of Edward Teague and the rest of the pirate lords, and we also met Esmeralda, who is the granddaughter of Don Rafael, who was the previous pirate lord of the Caribbean before he died, and then Esmeralda took up the mantle. We also saw Jack Sparrow as a first mate on an EITC merchant ship, and we got to see him meeting Cutler Beckett for the first time. And Beckett also promoted Jack to captain and gave him the Wicked Wench. That's right, the Wicked Wench. But Chapter 5 picks up with a character we have not spent any time with yet, and that is the Princess of Zerzura, Amenirdis. Now, fair warning before we start this chapter, this does get a little graphic at times, and there's a lot of harsh treatment of African people. A lot of slavery mentioned in this chapter as well. I won't be delving too into that, but if you read the chapter itself, it definitely goes a lot more in depth. So the chapter starts with Amenirdis dreaming of the day she lost her name and herself. She is currently in a building full of female house slaves, which lets you guess what has happened to her. She also has a crude gray shawl wrapped around her right now, which will become important a little bit later. But as she tries to go to sleep, she thinks back to how she got here. So we find out that it has been 5 years since Pharaoh Taharka left Zerzura to find a cure for his son Aniba, and he has not returned. What's even worse is that Aniba passed away only 3 months after Taharka left. A year after this, Amenirdis' brother Shabako, who was 14 at the time, also left Zerzura in hopes of finding their father, but Shabako also did not return. So that leaves only Queen T and Amenirdis still known to be alive from the Zerzuran royal family. Amenirdis is now 20 years old, and one night she wakes up after experiencing a vision of their ancient homeland of Kush. Zerzura has not been in contact with the people who remained in Kush for more than 3,000 years, so Amenirdis thought that if she ventured there and prayed at the most ancient temple devoted to Apidemak, hopefully she would learn of her brother and father's fates. She could still feel Shabako's presence in her mind, so she believes him to still be alive. But unfortunately, this excursion was fruitless. Her and her caravan traveled across what they found out was now called Ethiopia, and made it to Kush, but she found out this region was now called Nubia, and the city of Kerma was now nothing more than ruins wasting in the sand. So Amenirdis and her caravan now begin their journey home. With Amenirdis are a few important characters, or characters who will become important a little bit later. Most important of these is Tarek, who is Amenirdis' bodyguard. He is also a eunuch, which makes sense given his position in the Zerzuran hierarchy, and he is tall and strong and goes wherever the princess goes. We also have the High Priest of Zerzura, who is named Pai, and with them are about 4 warrior priests, Amenirdis' 2 maids, a few baggage slaves, and a contingent of guards surrounding the caravan. These guards are equipped with the most efficient of weapons, bows and swords. And they are making their way through the savannah, but out of nowhere, a gunshot sounds nearby and one of the guards drops dead. Obviously, Amenirdis and the rest of the Zerzurans do not know what made the sound, as they think it was thunder that caused it. But the reason I specified the Zerzuran guards using bows is because in Zerzura, they have no knowledge of guns or other weapons of mass destruction. They are no longer in the protective bubble of Zerzura, though, and they are about to find out what the rest of the world has come to. So the commander of the guards yells for everyone to get down, and Amenirdis and the rest of the party does as they're told. They are in the savannah, so the grass is helping hide them from sight, and Amenirdis thinks that maybe the gods are angry with them, but she realizes that this doesn't make any sense. But then she hears another human shouting in a language she can't understand. Tarek and Pi tell Amenirdis to start crawling, and she begins to do so with Tarek and the others moving behind her. After a while of crawling through the grass, they reach an outcropping of sandstone, which they hope to hide among until the sun goes down. But as they do that, another gunshot sounds from nearby, and Tarek grabs Amenirdis, and both of them, along with Pi, hide in a small little cave among the rocks. As they hide, they hear more gunshots and screams before everything goes quiet. Pi gives them all water and some bread to replenish their strength, as they know they will have to move soon. But they hear the hunters nearby setting up camp for the night. After this, Amenirdis hears screams from two voices she recognizes, who are both of her maids, Amenimelo and Penut. I hope I pronounced those right. She wants to go help them, but Tarek and Pi insist she stays hidden. But Pi has the idea for her to disguise herself. So firstly, she takes off her earrings, necklace, and armlets, but she does keep one piece of jewelry on, and that is the bracelet she wears, which is one of the 3 bracelets that is needed to open the way into the Zerzuran labyrinth. Pi begins to weave an illusion, but it requires a central object. Pi selects an old gray shawl as the central object, so whenever Amenirdis is touching or wearing this shawl, the illusion will be cast and she will be disguised. Pi settles on the disguise being of an old, ugly woman, so she will not suffer to the lustful vices of the men hunting her. They also make sure to disguise her bracelet as well, changing it to a scrap of fabric, and together, Pi and Amenirdis weave the illusion, and after it is finished, both of them are completely exhausted. So now, when Amenirdis wears the shawl, she will look like an ugly old woman. Like, extremely ugly. But not long after they finish the spell, she is grabbed by one of the hunters, and we find out that she, along with Tarek and Pi, were all captured by slavers. When she was captured, she also changed her name so no one would potentially either recognize or find out about her origin. The name she chose for herself is Ayisha, and that is what she went by as a slave. We find out that 5 months have passed since she was captured, and currently she is on a big farm outside of Calabar. When they reached Calabar, half of her caravan had died either from their wounds, starvation, illness, or from the heat. Most of the survivors had then been sold to various people and taken away to different places. Only Ayisha, Tarek, and Pi were still left on African soil after they were sold. But unfortunately, she doesn't know where the man who purchased Pi took him. Only Ayisha and Tarek were purchased by the same owner, so they are the only 2 that are still together. They were purchased by an Englishman named Roger Dalton. Now, you may hear the name Dalton and ask, wait, is this man related to Fitzwilliam P. Dalton III from the Young Jack Sparrow series? Well, the answer is, we don't know. If you want to believe this is someone from Fitzwilliam's family, you can, but we have no idea if this Dalton guy is related to him at all. But anyway, Tarek works out in the fields, and Ayisha works as a seamstress, making clothing and fabric for the people in the house. We see that she is a gifted seamstress, and even Master Dalton and his wife have noticed her skills. Some of Mistress Dalton's friends have even asked Ayisha to make them gowns and such. As part of her disguise, she has made sure to not let her owners or anyone else know that she understands English. She started learning it from overhearing the Dalton family speaking to one another. And once she was brought to the Dalton farm, she learned the common language spoken by slaves at the time, which is known as Pidgin. This is the main language she communicates with to others currently, as to continue to disguise herself as a simple slave. But Ayisha is planning her escape very slowly. She gets a few coins from the commissioned dresses she sews, and she is gaining the trust of Master Dalton to run small errands in town. She plans to save enough coins to buy passage on a ship, and she and Tarek will hopefully be able to return to Zerzura. That is the plan, at least. But anyway, a few months go by, and now Ayisha is able to speak full sentences in English, although she practices in secret. She is currently sewing a blanket, and she sees Master Dalton approach her with a man that Ayisha does not know. This man, however, will be referred to by Ayisha multiple times as the man with black gloves. So let's find out what happens here. One day, after she had finished weaving a beautiful blanket for a newborn on its presentation day, she sat sewing in the big house, her needle flashing silver in the sunlight streaming through the west-facing window. Glancing up at the sound of footsteps, she saw Master Dalton, accompanied by a short, slight man wearing a black hat, coat, and black gloves. For the briefest second, their gazes touched. Ayisha stabbed herself with her needle. Quickly, before her blood could touch the silk, she pulled her finger away and sucked it hastily, keeping her eyes down. Despite the heat, she felt chilled to the bone from the touch of the newcomer's eyes. She had seen that look in a man's eyes before, during their march to Calabar. The head slaver was a black man who insisted on being called Duke to his face, though she learned that his real name was Ancona Renjon. Duke had eyes like that. She was aware, peripherally, of the man glancing at Master Dalton incredulously. "I see you were not exaggerating when you called her ugly, sir. A face to curdle fresh milk, Master Dalton." His accent was strange, unlike any Ayisha had heard before, and she had some trouble understanding him. She listened intently as she began sewing again. "'Tis true, Ayisha's looks will never bring her the attention of a man," Master Dalton said. "But she's a good worker, weaves a fine cloth, sews a fine seam, gives no trouble. And you say you bought her from Ancona Renjon from the coffle he brought in the last of January. The same coffle with the old holy man and the big eunuch." "That was the one," Master said. "I always go among the slaves and speak to those I consider buying. I can make myself understood in Yoruba. My wife told me she needed a weaver and a seamstress, and I asked the woman if any of them could weave or sew. This one raised her hand. I took her across the street before the sale to the house of a friend, and showed her a loom, told her to weave. And weave she could, so I bought her. Because of her looks, she came cheap. It was a pleasant surprise to discover she could also sew." "She speaks no English?" "No. Only a few words of Yoruba and of course a bit of the pidgin the slaves here in Calabar use. Yes, no, come here, that kind of thing. I don't think she's actually lack-witted, but my wife has to speak to her very simply. At first I wondered if she was mute, but she's not. But she hardly ever speaks." "My employer is in need of a good weaver and seamstress for his household," the newcomer said. "How much?" Master Dalton shook his head. "I don't want to sell Ayisha. She's too good at her craft." Hearing this, it was all Ayisha could do not to visibly sag in relief. The man with the black gloves frightened her. She didn't know why, but she was convinced that whatever he wanted her for, it wasn't her ability as a seamstress or weaver. She stitched faster, and moments later heard them leave. That night she dreamed of the day that Penut had been unable to rise from the ground. Ayisha, weakened herself, had been trying to help her stand, when Duke had come striding over. With a swift shove, he thrust the princess away from her maid, and then she heard the thunder crack of his pistol. Penut had sagged to the ground, a hole between her wide-open eyes. Ayisha had had this dream before. In the dream, as she had done in life, she had raised her gaze to the slaver, incredulous that he could wipe out a human life as though Penut had been nothing more than a beast. But this time, when she looked up at Ancona, his face was the face of the visitor with the black gloves. Ayisha awoke, sweating and trembling. She was so terrified of falling asleep and dreaming again of him that she lay there, pinching the inside of her elbow until dawn brightened the eastern sky, and it was time to rise and begin work. Not long before noon, Mistress Dalton came to the weaving room in the slave quarters to find her. 2 men accompanied the Englishwoman. Ayisha glanced at them covertly. One of them was the man with the black gloves. She had to exert every bit of control not to let her fear show. The other man was different. She realized quickly that he was a wealthy English gentleman. One glance at the quality of his clothing, the fabric, the tailoring, told her that. He was also short. Ayisha puzzled over his age. His features were smooth, unlined, but his hair was as white as milk and worn in 2 large curls on either side of his face. As they stood there, staring at her, Ayisha continued to weave, her loom clacking rhythmically. She didn't make eye contact with the newcomers, but watched them covertly. Mistress indicated Ayisha, then bobbed a curtsy as she addressed her guests. "Here she is, sir, the weaver you asked to see. Her name is Ayisha." Raising her voice, she called, "Ayisha!" Ayisha stopped weaving and looked up, unsure whether to rise. "Mistress?" she asked, speaking pidgin. "Master has sold you, Ayisha," her mistress said. "I'm sorry to see you go, but it can't be helped. Go and gather your things, then come back here immediately. Don't dawdle." Ayisha rose, feeling her heart leap with fear. She bobbed a quick curtsy, nodding. Quickly she headed for the door. "What should I do? I want to run, but what good would that do? I'd be caught before I'd gone a mile. The trackers have dogs." As she neared the doorway, head down, Mistress Dalton and the black-gloved man stepped back so she could leave, but the white-haired man suddenly moved, stepping in front of her, barring her exit. "Hello, Ayisha," he said in English. "My name is Cutler Beckett, and I am your new master. I can't wait till we have a nice, long talk. Okay, so Cutler Beckett is the one who has purchased Ayisha, and we obviously know that it's not only because he needs a seamstress, but also the man with black gloves is none other than Ian Mercer. And I think the description of him from Ayisha's perspective is just super chilling. Mercer is chilling regardless, but he's even more intimidating from Ayisha's perspective. But we then go on to Chapter 6 and see Jack Sparrow, or should I now finally say, Captain Jack Sparrow, on the deck of none other than the Wicked Wench. And we are going to head back into the book real quick to read Jack's first time seeing the wench. This part is just so well written, and this is just an incredibly important moment for Jack. So let's go back in and take a look. Jack Sparrow had never thought it would happen to him. All his life, he heard people speak of love, mostly men, of course, since he spent the majority of his life at sea, and there were few women who chose that life. Life on the sea was a male-dominated occupation, whether the sailors were pirates, or seamen aboard a merchant ship, or the crew of a naval vessel. There were the rare and refreshing exceptions, of course, such as Esmeralda, lovely Esmeralda. Men were self-conscious about referring to love. They were often given to enthused bragging regarding their carnal adventures and conquests, but when they referred to love, it was usually in a hushed whisper, or a mumble, sometimes an awed murmur if the poor chap was embarrassingly besotted. Jack wanted to shout his adoration aloud, and he would have, too, if he hadn't had a certain dignity to maintain. But ever since that day when he'd first seen her, he'd thought of her with love. No other word fit. She was lovely, yes, of course, but there was more to it than that. She moved with authority, as well as beauty. There was a wildness, a sense of freedom and strength about her that captivated his heart, his soul. He wanted her for his own. When he'd finally gotten close to her, could touch her, she responded to his touch, he fancied, the way she had never responded to another man's. Love, yes, there was no other word for the way he felt about her. At night he even dreamed about her, about how it felt to guide her as she moved, feeling her respond to his orders. Her intoxicating scent, tar and salt and honest sweat, the sound she made, the wind filling her ivory sails, the creak of her sheets, the slap of the waves against her red-gold bow as she clove the sea. She was beautiful, a work of art with graceful, gilded lilies and scrollwork emblazoned on her bow and stern, and gilded railings on her gunwales. A golden dream of a vessel, and she was all his to command. The Wicked Wench was her name, and Jack Sparrow, at long last, knew what it was to be in love. The first time he'd seen her, she'd been tied up at the EITC dock in Calabar, looking somewhat forlorn. It was plain she hadn't been taken out for the last few months since Cutler Beckett had acquired her. She was a ship that needed maintenance. First and foremost, she was crying out for a good careening, and once her bottom was clean, her decks needed scrubbing, her railings and trim needed painting. Her sails needed patching, and many of her lines needed replacement or splicing. But Jack had seen beyond her down-at-heels appearance, seen the glory and grandeur of a full-rigged ship that could prove both fast and maneuverable. This wench had felt a lot of the ocean slide beneath her keel, but she was sound. He could feel it in his bones. She most resembled a Dutch East Indiaman. Typical of merchant vessels, she was woefully undergunned. Only 6 big guns on both the port and starboard sides of her main deck, then 2 smaller guns, 6-pounders, on her weather deck, and finally 3 small swivel guns topside, 1 4 and 2 on her quarterdeck. The wench's main deck guns were heavy ones, 12-pounders. Jack thought about what it would be like to hear the roar of those big 12-pounders loosed in a broadside against an opponent, and shivered with excited anticipation before he sternly reminded himself that merchant captains counted themselves blessed if they never had to fire their guns. Jack longed for more armament for his new love, even though he knew he'd have trouble finding and training enough crew to man even as many guns as she now boasted on her main deck. Arming merchant ships was a trade-off. Guns, powder, and supplies took up space below decks that could be used for valuable and profitable cargo. Still, remembering his former associates at Shipwreck Cove, Jack immediately resolved to speak to Cutler Beckett about allowing him to install 2 additional 12-pounders. That still wouldn't be enough weaponry to make any determined pirate think twice, but it was enough to dissuade smaller, more lightly armed and crewed vessels. The day he first saw her, Jack stood there, spellbound, studying her every curve, every line, grinning like a besotted suitor. He couldn't help the first thought that sprang to his mind. If I could just find enough men to crew her properly, what a pirate ship she'd make! If she were properly armed and crewed, this ship could square off with Esmeralda's Blackwall frigate. Morgan himself never had such a ship. Sternly, Jack Sparrow repressed that thought. He was an honest merchant captain, and he'd best never forget it. As Jack had stood there, gazing at his ship, he heard a step beside him and turned to find Robbie Green at his elbow. "Jack," the younger man exclaimed, "I've been looking all over for you. Finally had to ask that nasty codfish of a portmaster Blount where he'd seen you. He told me you were down here staring at this ship, and had been for at least an hour. What's going on?" Had it been that long? Jack blinked. He'd been so ensorcelled by the sight of his new vessel, making plans for getting her ship shape, that time had simply evaporated. He smiled at his friend and gestured at the ship. "What do you think of her?" Robbie stared at the Wicked Wench for a moment, then shrugged. "She'd be perfect if we were still on the account and we had enough guns, powder, and crew to sail her properly. Why?" Jack chuckled at hearing his own initial assessment echoed so precisely. "She's mine, Robbie. Mr. Beckett made me her captain. We'll be taking her out in a couple weeks with a load of cargo." He glanced back at the ship, straining against her tethering ropes like a spirited horse that wanted to run free. "How does it feel to be first mate of the Wicked Wench?" A smile crept across Robbie Green's tanned features. "First mate? Me? Who better?" Jack said. Robbie laughed, then quickly sobered. "We'll have to put together a crew." "She has some crew still in port," Jack said. "Many of them found other berths and shipped out, but the office records indicate that there are perhaps 20 of them still here in Calabar. I'll give you the list, and you can start rounding them up. Plus any hands you can scrounge up." He glanced at the hill at the town of Calabar. "Not the best spot to find able-bodied seamen, I fear," he added wryly. "Able-bodied?" Robbie echoed. "Jack, we'll be lucky if we can find ordinary seamen. Her bottom's a mess." Jack rubbed his chin meditatively. "She's nothing but barnacles and muck below her waterline. Mr. Beckett gave me a free hand and some funds I'm used to get her ship shape. I'm figuring 2 weeks till she's ready to sail." Robbie nodded. 2 weeks, aye. I'll do my best to round up the crew we need, Captain." Jack grinned. "Doesn't that sound so beautiful? Captain Jack Sparrow. Nice ring to it, eh?" "Very nice indeed, Jack. Or are you so eager to hear it that I have to call you Captain even when we're alone?" Jack laughed out loud. "Indulge me for a few days, Robbie me lad. It's been a long time coming." "Aye, it has. And you deserve it, Captain." Jack sighed happily. "I suppose I'll get used to it with time, Robbie, but at the moment, hearing it is better than a swig of rum, I swear." He fell silent, regarding the ship, then his gaze shifted upward. "I'm thinking we should rake her masts back a bit to get more speed out of her." Robbie nodded. 3 degrees? 5. Jack's eyes lit up. "She'll cut quite a figure, eh, mate?" Robbie nodded. "The masts look to be in good shape. We'll need to go over all her canvas. First, though, we've got to get her hull ship shape. We'll take her up one of the Calabar's tributaries half a mile, careen her on one of those nice sandy banks." Robbie swallowed. "The ones with all the crocodiles?" "Aye," said Jack. He waved a hand airily. "The crocs won't be any problem. One blast from a swivel gun will send those scaly blighters slithering back into the river." He rubbed his hands with anticipation at the thought of firing one of the guns. He was actually sober, but he felt as if he had a few quick jolts of rum. He couldn't stop smiling. Robbie laughed and threw up his hands. "All right, you win. We'll scrub her hull as clean as a girl's baby's bum on her christening day. First we clean her, then we replace any worn planking," Jack said, totting off items on his black-rimmed fingers. "Then we'll need to pave the bottom to protect against weed and worm. For that we'll need fat and soap. And then we'll tallow her. And if Mr. Beckett will spring for it, perhaps we'll sheathe her too." "What about coating her with the black stuff?" "That's the last step. We're not in Bristol or Liverpool. We're more likely to be able to get white stuff," Jack said. "We'll need at least a barrel per side. I know how to mix it." "No wonder the worms won't eat it." Robbie made a face. "All that protectant stinks to high heaven." "Train oil, pine rosin, and brimstone, mate," Jack said with satisfaction. "It should." The two stood there, gazing happily at their new acquisition, discussing the Wicked Wench's proposed toilette. The next 2 weeks were busy ones. Jack, who could work like a demon when he was motivated, was up every day before dawn, overseeing the cleaning and refitting of his new vessel. First of all, I just want to say again how much I love the way Jack's feelings toward the Wicked Wench are written. It starts off potentially describing features and characteristics of a woman before you realize it's all about her, the wench. Jack loves this ship more than anything in the world, and it's important to establish that here and now when he first sees her. But as Robbie recruits their new crew, Jack beaches the wench to clean her and smear this white stuff, essentially a sealant, on the hull of the wench. Robbie brings 3 able seamen and 2 ordinary seamen to Jack for review, and this is where we meet the 2 ordinary seamen. These 2 guys are a tall Frenchman named Etienne de Ver and a short, burly Englishman named Lucius Featherstone. These guys are essentially the Pintel and Ragetti of this book, as they are constantly arguing with each other. Jack finds out they were both infantry for their respective countries of origin in the war that ended 3 years ago. They are both proud countrymen, and most of the bickering between them is because they are trying to proclaim the glory of their respective country. Jack also finds out they both served together on a ship named the Molly Dover, which wrecked off the coast, which explains why they are here now. They both begin to argue as they both want to be promoted to able-bodied seamen, but Jack tells them they will have to achieve it during their voyage. So they are both brought aboard the crew. Next up is stocking the wench with provisions. Jack hauls the first shipment of provisions onto the ship, which were delivered by the EITC portmaster Benjamin Blount. Jack then checks the barrels of salt beef and pork, and the top layer is good, but under that, the rest of the meat is disgusting and full of maggots. Jack then checks everything else and sees the flour is infested with weevils, which was also the case for the biscuits too. So Jack gets pissed at this, and he brings all the infested provisions back to the harbor and brings them back to Benjamin Blount's office. He goes in and asks to see Mr. Blount, but the clerk says that Blount left to go to the provisions storehouse. So Jack then takes the wagon full of infested provisions to the storehouse, and he begins to bang on the large door asking for Mr. Blount. So we're going to go back into the book and see what happens here. As he raised his hand to bang on the door again, he heard footsteps approaching from inside the warehouse. Then a padlock clicked. The door opened, allowing a blade of sunshine to pierce the gloomy interior. Portmaster Blount, a thin, almost cadaverous man of middle years with wispy gray hair and a thick, luxuriant beard, appeared, followed by a slender African youth, scarcely more than a lad. The portmaster stepped through the door, blinking at the sudden transition from darkness to light. "Who is that? Captain Sparrow? What's going on? This is most irregular. You need to make an appointment with my clerk. I'm very busy at the moment." Jack flashed an insincere smile at the man. "So sorry to have troubled you, Portmaster Blount, but I'm afraid my errand is urgent. I'm preparing to set sail within a few days, and I need to provision my ship." He cocked an eyebrow at the man. "My EITC vessel, the Wicked Wench, Mr. Beckett's own ship." Blount's pinched features did not change in the slightest. He was a cool-headed scoundrel. The Wicked Wench? He was the picture of innocence. "Why, I dispatched the first load of provisions to her just today, Captain Sparrow. You didn't receive them?" Jack took a deep breath, controlling the urge to grab Blount and throttle him. Every time he thought about discovering, after a week, 2 weeks, perhaps even a month at sea, that half his provisions weren't fit to feed dogs, much less his crew, the notion of sailing his ship back to the EITC docks and loosing a broadside of the EITC warehouse seemed like a better idea. Does he only try this trick with newcomers, charging the EITC for real provisions and substituting rotted trash, and of course, pocketing a tidy profit? "I brought them back, Mr. Blount, is what I did," Jack said. Turning, he put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, then beckoned. A moment later, his crewmen came into view with the overloaded wagon. "And unless you immediately furnish me with my full stowage of clean flour and vermin-free biscuit, plus salt beef and pork that won't run through a man like seawater through a breached hull, my men are going to take these barrels up the street to Mr. Beckett's office and take them inside." Jack glared at Blount. "And then, perhaps, we'll tell Mr. Beckett where they came from, just before we spill them on the floor, eh, mate?" Blount did not react to this suggestion, but the African lad, evidently his slave, did. His eyes widened, then his mouth quirked as he stifled a smile. He understood what I said, Jack thought. For a moment his eyes met those of the youth, then the lad looked down at his bare feet. The portmaster raised a hand slightly. "Captain Sparrow, I must say I have no idea what you are fussing about. The provisions I dispatched to you were of the highest quality. I ordered Chamba here," he indicated the slave, "to load them himself, after showing him where to find the correct supplies." Turning to the lad, he addressed him rapidly in the pidgin dialect that was commonly used among the slaves and slavers in Calabar. The lad shook his head side to side, murmuring a soft-voiced reply. Hearing what appeared to be the slave's denial, Blount finally showed some emotion. His pinched features tightened with rage. Then he drew back his arm and backhanded the lad across the face, hard enough to drive him to his knees. As the young slave cowered on the ground, both hands raised to shield his head from more blows, Jack's hands tightened into fists. Stepping forward, he grabbed the portmaster's arm before the man could deliver another blow, turning him around so he could see the man's face. "Just a minute, Mr. Blount," Jack said. "What did you ask him? I don't speak the local lingo, mate." Blount faced Jack, the rage vanishing from his features as though he had never been there. "I asked Chamba whether he loaded the barrels designated for your vessel with the supplies I indicated, and he told me that instead of doing that, he loaded the barrels from supplies that hadn't passed inspection and were marked to be destroyed," the portmaster said, anger creeping back into his voice. "This stupid, damned blackamoor actually admitted what he'd done." Jack's eyes narrowed. But why would a slave do that? It's not like he could sell what he didn't put in those barrels. Slaves weren't permitted to engage in any business transactions, not legally anyhow. Blount shrugged. It's not like he did it for a reason, Captain. They're like animals, you know, so stupid they can't remember anything for more than a minute or two. He turned around to glare at the youth, still crouched in the dust. When he turned back, his features were composed once more. I'm sorry, Captain Sparrow. I'll reissue your supplies immediately, and you may be sure that Chamba will be lashed within an inch of his miserable life as soon as you've gotten your supplies and you're on your way. Jack stared at Blount, trying to picture the situation Blount had described, but he just couldn't credit it. There had been too much intelligence and humor in Chamba's eyes when they'd shared that glance over the idea of Jack dumping rotten meat and flour on the floor of Cutler Beckett's frighteningly tidy office. No, Blount was lying to try to cover his own perfidy. The portmaster had made an attempt to line his own pockets, and Jack had caught him at it. Why else had the bad provisions had a layer of good stuff on top if they weren't part of a plan to disguise their unsavory contents and send the Wicked Wench on her way loaded with supplies that were too old or too improperly cured to be acceptable? Jack raised a skeptical brow, then shifted his weight to look past the portmaster at the slave. Is that true, Chamba? He asked. You loaded the Wicked Wench's barrels with rotted meat and infested biscuit because you couldn't remember which barrels to use? Did you even load those barrels, the ones destined for delivery to my ship? Chamba shook his head very slightly from side to side. His lips moved, forming the word no. Don't bother addressing him in civilized language, Captain, Blount said dismissively. Chamba doesn't understand English. That's what you think, Jack thought. Again, his eyes met the youngster's frightened, pleading gaze. He dropped his eyes, wishing there was something he could do. But Chamba was property, here in Calabar, expensive property. Jack had been paid for his voyage aboard Fairwind, and he actually still had some of his pay left, which was highly unusual. Normally when sailors reached port after a voyage and got their pay, they headed to the taverns, the gaming halls, and the bawdy houses. When their money ran out, they staggered back to their ships, their heads pounding and their purses empty. The only reason Jack still had money left from his voyage aboard the Fairwind was that he had been working so hard on fitting out the wench that he hadn't had time for the diversions offered in Calabar. But he knew without even counting the coins in his purse weren't enough to purchase a slave. Much as he had liked to help the lad, Jack couldn't afford to get involved. So Blount agrees to get, obviously, new provisions for Jack after Jack caught him in the act. And in that passage, we also learned about Chamba, who is one of Portmaster Blount's slaves. As we know, Jack despises slavery, and seeing Chamba treated so terribly by Blount gives Jack the idea of actually buying Chamba, but he knows that he doesn't have the money required for something like that. But anyway, Jack heads back to the Wench with the new provisions and finishes his repairs on the ship. Beckett approved Jack's request of adding 2 more 12-pounders to the main deck, and he hoped to add more 6-pounders maybe for the next voyage. The crew pulls the Wench from its beach spot into the Calabar River, and they anchor the ship there for the night. Jack is currently in the captain's cabin, which has been freshly painted in periwinkle blue. It's definitely a color that only Jack would find good looking, but Jack is also happy because the cabin contains his own private head, which is essentially his own private toilet. And in this toilet, Jack has a secret compartment he has created. He had to modify the seat to do so, but now there's a secret compartment next to it which stores a 3-foot by 2-foot box where Jack could store whatever he wanted to keep hidden. Currently, Jack has his private stash of rum in there, and he takes a few swigs before settling back in his chair. And right after this, he hears a mysterious voice. This mysterious voice is actually Chamba, and he tells Jack he escaped from Mr. Blount. He played dead after Blount finished whipping him, and then escaped down to the river before making his way over to the Wench. Chamba is currently holding onto the side of the ship, so Jack pulls him into the cabin and pours some rum over his wounds. Jack decides to help Chamba, so let's see what happens. Listen, Chamba, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I've decided to help you. I'll be sailing within a day. I can take you and drop you off somewhere. Somewhere? Where can I go? Chamba's eyes were wide with fear. That's what we'll have to figure out, Jack said. Where was your home, before you were captured? He wondered if there was some way to arrange for the lad to be taken back home. It didn't seem likely. My home would be gone, Captain. The slavers take the whole village. They take everyone. Burn what left. They take my mother, my father, my sisters. They kill my old granddad because him not keeping up. No home left, Captain Sparrow. Oh, Jack said. I see. How can men be so vile, he wondered. That's a predicament then, Chamba. A problem, he translated, seeing the youth didn't understand the long word. I have to sail away, he explained. And when I do that, what's to become of you? The lad looked at him. Going with you, Captain, please. Stay here on the ship. The ship, she be free. Your sailor men, they free. Me, I want to become like them, a sailor man. Learn the sailor trade, sail far away from here. The disgust in the word here spoke volumes. Jack blinked. Oh. It hadn't occurred to him that Chamba had fled to him with a plan, but he should have realized. The lad was smart and cunning, good qualities in a sailor, and there was no denying his courage. He thought it over, taking his time while Chamba sat there, tense with mingled hope and fear. Their voyage would take at least 4 or 5 months. At Chamba's age, that could make a big difference in a boy's appearance. 5 months of enough food would put some muscle in that skinny frame. He might get a bit taller. His beard was just starting to come in, which was a good sign. They could shave his head, perhaps. By the time they came back to Calabar, he might well be unrecognizable as that runaway skinny runt of a slave. And just to make sure, he'd order the kid to stay hidden while they were in port. Jack sighed. I hope I won't regret this. All right, he agreed. You can start in as cabin boy and cook's assistant while you learn how to rig the sails and all the rest of what it takes to be a sailor. For the first time, a light sparkled in Chamba's eyes, and he smiled. The expression transformed his face. Aye, Captain, I be a good sailor man, the best, you will see. Jack held out the shirt. Here, put this on, keep the dirt out of those wounds. With a hiss of pain, Chamba eased the shirt over his head. It was so long it fell past his hips. Jack handed him a blanket. You can make yourself a bed in my pantry. There's enough room in there for you to stretch out. The door's closed. Aye, Captain. Gamely, Chamba climbed to his feet and limped after him to arrange his sleeping place. And over here is the head, Jack said, and took him to the other side of the cabin to show him the other enclosure overhanging the quarter galley. While he was standing there, looking at the head, something occurred to him, and he looked at the youth. If Mr. Blount comes to the ship tomorrow, looking for you, you'll need to hide, understand? I'll give you some warning. If you hear me rap on the door to my cabin, 1 rap, hide, he demonstrated. Chamba nodded. Where, Captain? I think you can fit in here. I'll move the rum out, temporarily. Jack opened the hidden compartment, leaned over, and pulled out the bottles. He stowed them away in the pantry. When he came back, Chamba was staring down into the box-like hiding area. Jack looked at it, then looked at the lad. Can he fit in there? He asked, dubiously. Aye, Captain, Chamba said. If fitting mean Mr. Blount don't catch me, I fit. All right, then. Make sure you don't leave any sign that you've been here in the cabin, savvy? Understand? If Blount comes here, I'll make sure this is the last place he comes in. That should give you time to hide. Aye, Captain. Hide good, that's me. After he settled the youth in the pantry, Jack stripped down to his drawers, then blew out the lantern. He wondered if he'd lie awake, but the long day, coupled with the effort of hauling the runaway through the window, had tired him. It wasn't long before he slept. So the next day, Jack loads the rest of the provisions and sees that Portmaster Blount is here looking for Chamba, who ran away last night. He asks to search the wench, and Jack lets him. He makes Robbie take Blount through the ship, checking for him. Meanwhile, Jack alerts Chamba via knocking on his cabin door to hide. Blount then asks to search Jack's cabin, and Chamba is hiding in the secret compartment in the head like Jack told him. Jack realizes the latch isn't secure, so he excuses himself and closes the hatch once he's inside the head. Blount then gives up on his search and leaves, and the next morning, the wench sails out of Calabar on its voyage. Jack then has to figure out a way to introduce Chamba to the crew, so he tells only Robbie about Chamba and then crafts a plan. He tells the crew that there were still some bad provisions delivered, so they have to dock at a nearby port in the Cape Verde Islands to pick up new provisions. They dock in St. Iago and pick up new barrels of biscuit, and this is where Jack mentions passingly to the crew that they need a cabin boy and asks them to keep an eye open for one while they're in port. They wait for nightfall, and then Jack helps Chamba off the ship out of the cabin windows with the help of Robbie. Jack then gets off the ship normally and gives Chamba some new clothes. He gives him a bandana to tie around his head, and this is all to keep Blount off Chamba's trail when they return to Calabar at the end of the voyage. They decide to keep his name Chamba, as he tells Jack it is a common enough name. And there's this little passage here in the book that I just want to read off because it's really, really awesome. The youth stood up, his sack slung over his shoulder to face the captain again. He hesitated for a moment, then said, Captain, I know all what you did for me. You and Mr. Robbie. I won't forget me. Jack made a deprecatory wave. Come on, mate. Back to the ship. Time to start earning your wages, sailor man. The young man's teeth flashed white in the moonlight, and he nodded. Jack took his newly hired cabin boy back to the ship with him, and together they climbed the gangplank. So Chamba is now officially part of the crew, as Jack introduces him as the new cabin boy he just picked up in port. No one suspects anything, and the plan worked swimmingly. So the wench departs St. Iago with its new cabin boy, Chamba. And I just want to say, I love Chamba so much. He's one of my favorite characters in this book. He's so sweet, and I love him to death. This also just shows what a good man Jack truly is, as he risks all of this just to help this slave. It really sets the stage for what is to come later in this book. But a few weeks later, the wench arrives in the Caribbean, and Jack finds a freshwater cay they used to restock. Jack takes a nice little swim, and he is reminded of his swims with Esmeralda back in Shipwreck Cove. So now we flash back to years prior, where Jack and Esmeralda are spending lots of time together. Teague sees this and warns Jack to stay away, but Jack being Jack decides not to pay his dad any mind. Jack and Esmeralda share time together for 2 weeks, and then one day Jack notices that Kristoff has shown up eager to join them. So Kristoff then joins them for the next 10 days, and Jack starts to get jealous. He knows for a fact that Kristoff is trying to get with Esmeralda, but Jack doesn't say anything yet. One night, Jack and Kristoff escort Esmeralda to the Drunken Lady because she wanted to meet Steve and Marie. Esmeralda and Marie immediately get along, and they are sharing some girl time while Jack and Kristoff watch from their table. Kristoff also makes some weird remarks here about him being able to show Esmeralda an even better time, and he also thinks about having both Esmeralda and Marie in bed with him. And Jack does not like how Kristoff is talking about either Esmeralda or Marie, although he doesn't say anything currently to Kristoff as he is his friend. But Jack overhears someone talking about the Cobra, which, as you might remember from last time, was Barbossa's previous ship that was sunk by the rogue pirates. This guy's name is One-Tooth Tommy, and Tommy tells Jack that he saw the man who sank the Cobra, and that he is here in Shipwreck Cove. Jack wants to know more, but Kristoff interrupts, asking him if he wants to get some air with Esmeralda and him. So he leaves Tommy and joins his friends. But the next day, when he tries to find Tommy, he can't find him anywhere. So let's go back into the book and see what happens here. The next night, after spending the morning with Kristoff and Esmeralda, and watching Kristoff's ever bolder advances, a tense, frustrated Jack went looking for a wench he knew, a lively brunette by the name of Melinda. He found her in one of the rowdier taverns, the Parrot's Perch, on the arm of another pirate, a short, extraordinarily ugly man with a balding pate, hideous teeth, a pronounced paunch, and an evil leer. Melinda was looking very fine indeed that night, wearing her bottle green gown with her brown hair done up, baring her shoulders. Jack saw her through the crowd and began edging his way through it to reach her. He stepped on a few toes and got some dirty looks, but finally managed to get close to her. Her short, unappealing escort was grinning at her and running his grimy fingers down the sleeve of her gown. Jack was sure he glimpsed drool slicking the man's chin. He shuddered and raised his voice so she could hear him over the drunken din. "Melinda, love," he exclaimed, "let me take you away from all this." She turned at the sound of his voice, smiling broadly. One of her front teeth was missing, but Jack thought that gave her a piquant air. He leaned close enough to see the freckles that sprinkled her nose and cheeks and gestured at the inebriated admirer. "Ditch him, darling. Come away with me." Melinda regarded him speculatively, while absent-mindedly fending off the groping hands of her companion. She was clearly tempted. Jack flashed his most engaging, roguish smile at her, and she shook her head. "Darling, there's nothing I'd like better." She slapped a filthy hand away from her bosom. "But I knows ye, Jackie, you knows I does. And a workin' girl's gotta eat and pay the rent. Let me see the color of your coin, Jackie." Jack nodded, unfazed. Business was business, after all. Fumbling some coins from his purse, but curled his fingers over his palm when Melinda reached for them. She gave him a coquettish smile and winked one pretty brown eye. "That'll do, love. And you, Pintel, let go of me," she said, addressing her would-be escort. When the man protested in a slurred voice, not relinquishing his grasp, Melinda's knee flashed swiftly upward. The short pirate's knees sagged and he gasped. He let go. "Next time, when a lady says let go, Pintel," Melinda said, her pert nose in the air, "perhaps you'll listen." Swishing her skirt, she stepped over to Jack and took his arm. "Let's go somewhere quieter, Jackie," she suggested. "My very thought," he replied. Together they traversed the corridors and warren-like passageways of Shipwreck City, until they were once more at the level of the cove. It was much quieter outside, and they began walking along the docks looking for an unoccupied, dark place to conduct their business. They'd walked nearby around the little island that held Shipwreck City, all of it lined with layers of docks, passing Troubadour and Venganza midway. Finally, just as Jack was about to suggest going back to her room, he spied a place that would serve, a section of dock that lay in deep shadow cast by the nearby full moon. He steered Melinda toward it, and had just begun to strip off his coat to lay it down on the splinter-infested wood, when he heard a gasp from his companion that grew so shrill it was almost a scream. Whirling around, he saw her staring, eyes wide at the water. "What is it?" he demanded. Wordlessly, she pointed, her hand shaking. Jack looked, following the angle of her finger, and saw in the moonlight what was floating a few feet below them. He stared, silent with shock, hearing the gentle lapping of the water and also the soft, sodden thumps the left leg made as it drifted back and forth against the pilings. "Tommy," Jack whispered. "It has to be." The clothes were right, and the man had been bald, but he couldn't be certain. The dead flesh was the color of seawater and bloated. Seeing also that the crabs had been at the body, Jack felt his stomach lurch. He'd seen dozens, possibly hundreds of dead men, and some of them he'd known, but most of them had been killed in battle, not drowned. Hastily, he handed Melinda the coins she hadn't yet earned, and ordered her to go back to Troubadour's berth, call out to the crewmen on watch for Captain Teague, then lead the pirate lord back here immediately. "And then go straight home," he said. "All right," she agreed, her voice a bit unsteady as she made the coins disappear. "But what are you going to do, Jackie?" "I'm going to fish the poor old sot out," Jack said grimly, removing his waistcoat and looking around for a boat hook. "Hurry up now, love. You don't want to see this." "You're right," she said, and gulping audibly, snatched up her skirts and started off at a trot. Jack was thoroughly wet by the time he'd managed to get a rope around the corpse and haul it up on the deck. Clouds had moved in, and he had to conclude the last part of the nasty business in near darkness. Just as he finished turning the body over so it lay face up, he heard voices, and saw the swaying lights of lanterns approaching. Jack stood up dripping to find a very aggravated Captain Teague and several of his men approaching. "What's going on here, boy?" the keeper demanded impatiently. "What have you done now, Jackie?" Jack forced himself not to react to the way Teague had said that hated nickname. It wasn't anything new for the keeper to blame him for whatever went wrong. "Found a body in the cove," he replied. "One of Barbossa's crew. His name was Tommy. One-Tooth Tommy." He saw the anger in Teague's eyes and forced his voice to stay level. "Step over here, please, Captain," he said, moving out of earshot of Teague's men. Still angry, but beginning to be puzzled, Teague followed, motioning to his men for privacy. Jack gestured at the body and lowered his voice. "I met him 2 nights ago in the Drunken Lady. The poor old sot was bloody drunk off his arse and raving." Teague started to speak, but Jack held up a hand to forestall him. What he was going on about, Captain, was that during the battle he'd seen the captain of the rogue ship that sank the Cobra, said their attacker had a fancy brass bow chaser, but just before he clammed up he told me he'd seen the devil, that's what he called the captain, here, in the cove. Said he was standing on the deck of his ship 3 nights ago. The keeper had opened his mouth, doubtless to say something scathing, but by the time Jack finished speaking he shut it, then stood staring down at the body, obviously mulling over what he'd been told. Finally, Teague looked back up. "I've seen him before this. I spoke to all of Barbossa's surviving crew. Tommy was drunk when he spoke to me. Barbossa said he'd been drunk ever since the Cobra sank. He was probably drunk and he fell in. Or maybe he was passed out on the dock and rolled in. Did you examine him?" "No," said Jack, then added the obvious, dryly. "It's dark, Captain, but I will if you'll hold the lantern." Teague nodded brusquely, and held his lantern to illuminate the corpse. He gestured, and his men rejoined them. In the light of the 3 lanterns, Jack knelt back down on the dock, and not allowing himself to think about what he was doing, began examining the body, rolling it back and forth along the dock to see all sides. His stomach lurched again at the spongy feel of the cold flesh, and the squishing sounds it made, but he persisted, determined to discover what had happened. He even opened old Tommy's shirt to check his chest and back for bruises or stab wounds, but he drew the line at removing the ragged breeches. Finally, after 10 minutes or so of close examination, Jack sat back on his heels. "As far as I can tell, he wasn't struck, stabbed, or shot. No wounds on the body." Teague nodded as if satisfied that his conclusion had been borne out. "No foul play," he said. "I'm not so sure," Jack said. "There could still have been foul play, Captain. All it would have taken was for someone to get him so drunk that he passed out, then drop him into the cove. That would be murder." Teague sighed, but Jack's point was so obvious he didn't say anything. Still, it was clear that the pirate lord had made up his mind about One-Tooth Tommy's demise. "How long do you think he's been dead?" he asked. "More than a day, that's clear." Jack stood up. He was soaking, and even in the warm Caribbean evening, a breeze had sprung up. Shivering a little, he walked over to retrieve his effects. "I think he was killed not long after he spoke to me," he said, quietly, pulling on his waistcoat, then his coat. I think someone else heard what he was saying and felt threatened. Teague walked over to stand beside him and also lowered his voice. Who was in the drunken lady? Who might have heard what he was saying? Jack shrugged. I heard him from half the tap room away, crowded as it was. Anyone might have heard him ranting. Captain Teague blew out his breath unhappily, but said no more. Instead, he gestured to his men, and they picked up the body. Jack and Teague picked up the lanterns to light their way, and their little party started back toward Troubadour in silence. Jack walked along, holding his coat closed across his chest, remembering Tommy's insistence that the man he'd seen was the devil. Every so often, he shivered. So things are definitely heating up in Shipwreck Cove, but Jack snaps out of his memories and back to the present. The rest of the wench's voyage goes well, and Chamba is learning more and more English and getting better every day. The wench reaches Liverpool and then heads back to Calabar. Jack also realizes here that the Wicked Wench is incredibly fast, and that they would have equaled the record time of the voyage if they hadn't stopped in St. Iago. When they dock in Calabar, Jack notices there is a new portmaster named Parker, as Blount had fled Calabar after he'd been exposed for using rotten provisions. But Parker has someone with him, and that is Ian Mercer. Jack can tell just by looking at Mercer that he's dangerous, and he knew just from his eyes that he was a killer. Mercer tells Jack that Beckett would like to see him, and that he has someone he would like Jack to meet. So Jack follows Mercer up to Beckett's estate, and once they get there, Beckett's housekeeper, Mistress Goodright, helps Jack freshen up, which means taking a bath. Jack sees the bathtub he is supposed to bathe in, and is at first utterly confused as to what the purpose of it is. But after he bathes, he gets dressed in some very fine clothes, and you may be asking, all this effort just to see Beckett? But no, Jack is not only seeing Beckett, but he is also about to meet Viscount Lord Penwallow. So Jack then joins Beckett and Penwallow for luncheon, and Jack finds himself liking Penwallow very quickly. Jack also makes sure to eat and drink like a proper gentleman, which obviously is a little hard for him. And after the meal is finished, Beckett tells Jack that Penwallow has an important delivery he needs made to the new plantation he purchased on an island called New Avalon. And Jack is just the right person to do it. Also, just a little point here, the island of New Avalon does not actually exist and was made up for this book, in case you were wondering. Jack fears it may be slaves, but Penwallow specifies and tells him the cargo is building materials for the plantation house being built on the new property. But this is where Jack gets to know Penwallow a little bit more. So let's go back into the book. Jack relaxed and smiled. Building materials? I'll be happy to head right back out as soon as they're loaded and we've restocked. It's almost time for the rainy season here in Africa, and I'll be glad to get away before that happens. Penwallow nodded again. Capital, Captain Sparrow! He rubbed his beringed hands together, obviously in an excellent mood. This load will need your personal supervision, Captain. Some of the objects I've acquired are one-of-a-kind pieces of art, and all of them will be difficult to replace. For example, there will be 2 types of brick, the regular brick for the sides and rear of the house, and the ornamental brick for the front. Wait until you see the rose color of it. It's splendid, and of course the rare woods for the floors. Don't forget the more prosaic stuff, my lord, Cutler Beckett said, still smiling. Nails and hinges and fittings for the doors, lath and plaster and mortar, and boards, of course, both finished and rough-planed. Not to mention the tools for the workers. Cutler, my boy, you're forgetting my Italian marble tiles for the pavement, plus the fountain I purchased in Venice. The ITC director said, beaming. It's going to be a showplace, I declare. You'll be moving there, Lord Penwallow? Jack asked. To New Avalon? You and your family? We'll certainly be visiting there, the portly man said. Whether me wife Hortensia will agree to make it her year-round home remains to be seen. As for myself, I spend most of my time traveling for the EITC. New Avalon is lovely much of the year, Jack said. Summers are much hotter there than in England, of course. I've been there, but Lady Hortensia hasn't, Penwallow said. Still, the climate will be good for her joints, methinks. She suffers terrible with rheumatics every winter. Jack nodded. If the cold bothers her, then living in New Avalon should definitely help. Do you have children, Lord Penwallow? It sounds as though you're building a large plantation house. Yes, 2, Penwallow said. But our daughter Anna is married, and no doubt she'll be staying in England, though I hope she might visit and bring the children. Our son Frederick will probably prefer to remain in Surrey. He wouldn't want to miss the season at court. Ah, Jack said, nodding sagely, as though he met people who had relatives at court every day. I have their miniatures. Would you care to see? I'd like that very much, my lord. "Here we go, I always carry them." Lord Penwallow brought out the painted ivory miniatures in the little gold frames and handed them over. Jack studied them, listening as the old man rambled on about his family, particularly his son. Frederick Penwallow, it seemed, was the best rider to hounds in all of Surrey, could dance every dance at every fancy ball, hold his liquor with the best of them, and had never lost a game of chance. It was clear the young man was the apple of his father's eye, and something of a rake, Jack concluded, studying the pictured face. The miniature showed a young man of about Jack's age, with dark curled hair, and dark eyes with a hint of mischief in them, presuming that the artist had rendered a good likeness. "A handsome young gentleman," Jack said, handing back the picture. "Though for a young man of such high birth, I'm surprised he doesn't favor powdered wigs." Lord Penwallow laughed, delighted. "That's Frederick's own hair," he said. "Thick and curly as any fine wig, it is. Just between you and me, Captain Sparrow, he's a bit vain about it." Jack widened his eyes appropriately. "A fine head of hair indeed," he said. "I'll take odds Frederick is considered quite a catch, eh? All the young ladies setting their caps for him?" Penwallow gave Jack and Cutler Beckett a triumphant glance, then lowered his voice. "I was told by a reliable source in the Privy Council that Frederick has been referred to as England's most eligible bachelor." "I knew it!" Jack exclaimed. "Didn't I say it? All the young ladies." By the time the three men parted company later that afternoon, Jack knew a great deal about his lordship's family, and Lord Penwallow was convinced that Captain Jack Sparrow was not only a notable ship captain, but a young man of great taste and discernment. He positively beamed at Jack as they bade each other farewell. So Jack then makes his way back to the Wicked Wench and wonders how he could ever afford to buy a ship of his own. He also wishes that maybe the Wench could one day be his ship. But once Penwallow's materials are brought on board, the Wench sails to New Avalon to deliver them. We see that Chamba is learning quickly and is now an ordinary seaman, studying to be an able seaman. And Chamba is also a little bit of a troublemaker, as he likes to get Etienne de Ver and Lucius Featherstone riled up. But they reach New Avalon, deliver the materials, and Jack makes his way back to Calabar. At this point, Jack is ready to begin saving his wages, because he is determined to buy the Wicked Wench. But then we go back to Cutler Beckett, who is wondering when Jack will arrive back in Calabar. As we know already, Beckett is very impressed with Jack and is determined to make him a strong ally. Mercer has also informed Beckett that Jack helped an escaped slave aboard his ship, and apparently the slaves in Calabar have heard about this and are proclaiming Jack a hero. This also intrigues Beckett more. But if you remember from a few chapters ago, Beckett purchased Ayisha from her previous owner, and he now has her in her own dedicated room to the right of his office. Obviously to Beckett and Mercer, Ayisha seems like an ugly old slave who just happens to be good at sewing, but Beckett knows she is his key to finding Zerzura. Mercer even tracked down Duke Renjon and had him confirm that Ayisha was part of the group he captured. Renjon also gives Beckett more of the jewelry, and Beckett questions him about a specific royal-looking pectoral. Renjon tells him that they had taken it from a younger man they found wandering alone at the edge of the desert. They captured him and sold him off in Calabar before he was loaded onto a ship and taken to the New World. Beckett is eager to try and track down this specific slave, but he focuses on his mail and a letter from his cousin Susan. In this letter, Susan asks Beckett for help getting her son John apprenticed to the East India Trading Company. She tells him that she brought John to Beckett's father Jonathan, but he dismissed the boy, saying he had no head for business. Beckett sees the similarities after reading that phrase to his own experiences, and Beckett then flashes back to earlier in his life. We see an 18-year-old Cutler Beckett talking with his father Jonathan Beckett Sr. He asks Cutler what he wants to do with his life, and Cutler tells him he would like to become a scholar. Jonathan only really cares about how much money he would be making in that position, or if they give scholars titles. I also like here how Cutler brings up the fact that Isaac Newton may achieve a title soon, but Jonathan has no idea who that is. But he also tells his father that he would like to join the Beckett Trading Company, and Jonathan laughs and tells Cutler he has no head for business. He also tells Cutler that if he was tall and strong like his brothers, then he could purchase a commission in the service of the king. This angers Cutler even more, but then Jonathan tells Cutler he has a plan worked out for him. He tells him that he'll become a vicar, which is essentially a priest, and there's no more suitable life for him. He also tells Cutler he essentially lives like a priest now, so he might as well be one. This remark pisses Cutler off, but he remains composed as he tries to turn his father down. Jonathan is insistent, however, and he tells Cutler he already told his mother that he would be accepting it. Beckett's mother, if you remember, is sick and the doctors cannot find a cure for her. Cutler says that she will understand if he decides to choose something different. Jonathan tells him that she is dying, and seeing him settled as a clergyman is her final wish. And this is when Beckett blows his top and boils over. So let's go see what happens. "How dare you try to use my mother to manipulate me, you devil," Cutler said, his voice low and so full of menace that Jonathan Beckett actually looked frightened. "A wasting disease, is it? An unknown ailment? You lying, filthy hypocrite! I know what's wrong with my mother, and so do you. She has the damned pox, and you gave it to her." Cutler leaned farther forward. His father pushed back in his chair, his eyes wide and frightened. Guilt marked his features like a brand. Cutler raged on. "Why it hasn't brought you down yet, I don't know. But if I believed, I'd pray every day that it would. To claim you don't know what's wrong with her, after what you have done to her, after cavorting with your strumpets and trolls and legions of mistresses. My mother is a pure and chaste woman, you know that to be true, and yet she lies upstairs dying by inches because you brought the fruit of your whoring home to your own marriage bed and infected her. I despise you." Turning sharply, Cutler strode out of the office. He took the stairs 2 at a time up to his room, where he quickly packed his bags, and took the small store of money he'd been saving in his strongbox, counting it quickly. He frowned, biting his lip. "Here, Cutler," came a voice, and he looked up to see his sister Jane, standing in the open doorway of his room, holding out a small purse. "I've been saving too. You take it so you can get away, and then when you're settled you can send for me, the way we've always planned." Cutler stared at her, wondering how she knew. Guessing his unasked question, Jane smiled faintly, a smile that wrenched at his heart. "I was outside in the hall while you were talking to Father," she admitted. "I heard it all. I'm glad someone finally stood up to that tyrant. And stood up for poor Mother," she finished, her voice breaking. Cutler crossed the room to take the little purse. Jane put her arms around him and laid her cheek against his. Her face, he realized, was wet. Awkwardly, he returned her embrace. His throat felt so tight he thought he might choke. "Thank you, Jane. I will send for you. You have my word." "Goodbye, brother," she whispered. "May heaven keep you." Then she whirled around and ran out of the room. Slowly, Cutler Beckett walked across the hall and set his bags down. After tapping lightly on the door, he entered his mother's sick room. He was not there long. When he finally stumbled from the room, leaving his mother weeping behind him, Cutler Beckett felt as though something inside him had died forever. Picking up his bags, he headed down the back stairs. He'd leave by the servants' quarters. If he walked quickly, he should be able to catch the mail coach on its way to London. And once in London, he knew exactly where he would go. So after this, Beckett snaps back to the present. Mercer then comes in and tells Beckett he has had no luck tracking down the big slave, which is referring to Tarek. He also asks Beckett what Ayisha has been up to, and Beckett tells him she's just been working. Mercer asks if he could get a few minutes to persuade her into telling them what they need to know, but Beckett shoots this down immediately. Apparently, Mercer had tried to persuade another slave, but he had died during the act. And this slave was actually High Priest Pi. Beckett then has an idea and brings some of the Zerzuran jewelry to Ayisha to see if she will say anything. Ayisha realizes that the royal pectoral Beckett has was the one that belonged to her brother Prince Shabako, and Ayisha shakes her head no after looking at the pieces, and Beckett tries again. Ayisha gives him the same response, so Beckett gives up. But Ayisha now knows that her brother has been captured too, and is working as a slave somewhere in the west where most of the slaves were taken, this of course being the New World. Ayisha then prays to Apedemak for him to send her a ship and someone to sail it so they can find her brother. But then we go back to Jack Sparrow, who is currently trying to get some sleep, and he tries to drink a few swigs of rum to help him get sleepy, but he suddenly gets the urge to go out on deck and feel the night breeze on his face. So he makes his way out of his cabin and up to the quarterdeck, where he checks with the helmsman on duty, Roger Prescott. He then tells Prescott that he will take over for the rest of his watch. And after a brief moment between Jack and the wench, he then flashes back to Shipwreck Cove and what happened after he found One-Tooth Tommy's body. So Jack then decides to do something, as he feels like Teague is not taking this Tommy issue seriously. So in the morning, he makes his way from Shipwreck City over to the rock wall that encircled it, and after walking toward the Devil's Throat, he comes to a little outcropping where Esmeralda had stored a little boat she borrowed from Don Raphael. As he gets in the boat, he notices Esmeralda running down the beach to join him. She demands to join him, telling him he's not going swimming without her, but Jack tells her he is going around the cove, not swimming. She demands to join him anyway, so Jack rows back and lets her climb in. Jack asks why she was down here so early in the morning, and she tells him that she was going to move the boat. Jack at first gets scared that she didn't want to go swimming with him anymore, but Esmeralda tells him it was because of Kristoff, and that she didn't want him coming along anymore. Esmeralda tells Jack that Kristoff lately has been trying to make advances on her, and trying to touch her every chance he gets. She's had enough of him and wants to spend time with just Jack. This makes Jack smile, and he tells her that he has missed her. And after another moment, the two of them kiss for a while. Jack then tells her about what happened with One-Tooth Tommy, and I just want to bring up that I love how Esmeralda calls him Tommy of the One-Tooth. Jack tells her what Tommy told him, that he had seen the captain who sunk the Cobra here in Shipwreck Cove, and that is why he is going to be rowing around the cove. So after this, they row around and check all the sloops on the east side, and then they go and check the other side. They are looking specifically for a Bermuda-rigged sloop with a brass bow chaser, and as they check the western side, Jack notices a sloop with something shiny on her bow. They row closer, and Jack makes a startling discovery. The ship does indeed have a brass bow chaser, but this ship is Borya's ship, the Coldunya. Esmeralda cannot even imagine a pirate lord being one of the rogue pirates, but Jack tells her to say something to Don Raphael and get him to tell Teague. As for Jack, he's going to find Barbossa and get him to look at the Coldunya. After a while of searching, he finds Barbossa in a brothel and barges into the private room that Barbossa is in with the wench that he's with. Barbossa immediately pulls his sword on Jack, but he tells him he has important news for him. Jack tells Barbossa to come with him to check on Coldunya. So let's go back into the book and see what happens. When they reach the drunken lady, Jack motioned the captain to follow him in. We might be able to see her from here. Ah, there! He pointed out the window, open to catch the morning breeze. She's the sloop farthest to port. Barbossa stared at Coldunya, eyes narrowed. I see her. Bermuda-rigged sloop, yes. And I can see something bright in her bow. Catches the sun. He blinked, then shook his head. Me eyes aren't what they used to be, Jack. Looks like the same ship, but I can't be sure. Have you a spyglass? I do, Jack said, eagerly, and his face fell. I left it in the dory, he admitted, but we can be there in just a few minutes. Aye, let's hurry. Jack took to his heels, racing past Steve and Marie, who were standing behind the bar, gazing at them, their mouths open with astonishment as to see two pirates enter their establishment and not order anything to drink. Barbossa thudded after Jack as the younger man ran through the crowded warrens of Shipwreck City, down, until they emerged outside one of the entrances. Jack didn't want to call attention to their mission, so he slowed down and headed for the dock at a brisk walk. When they reached the dory, he was relieved to see the leather satchel was still shoved beneath the seat, and beneath it was the brass cylinder of his spyglass. He yanked it up, then dodged back and forth on the dock until he had a clear line of sight to Coldunya. Placing the eyepiece to his eye, he located the ship, then turned the barrel to bring the bow into focus. The brass cannon sprang into his view. There she is, Jack said, pointing, handing the spyglass to Barbossa. Sight right past that schooner there. Barbossa fixed the spyglass to his eye and moved it slightly, searching to bring the sloop into view. His fingers moved on the barrel, focusing. Jack blinked as he saw the sun flash off something on Coldunya's bow. What was that? He wondered, instantly alert. Barbossa had finally focused in on the sloop. Aye, he said. Rigging's the same. Looks like the same ship. And on her bow. Jack saw the flash again and suddenly realized what it was. Someone on Coldunya's bow was looking at them through a spyglass. Damn and blast! Exclaimed Barbossa. I had just started to get a good look at that brass bow chaser to see if it was the same one, but now it's gone. He added a string of more colorful terms, one or two in languages Jack didn't recognize. Jack grabbed the spyglass, and after refocusing it, he cursed too. There's something dark covering it now, he reported. They've hidden it. While you were examining the ship, I saw a flash from the spyglass. Someone aboard the sloop saw us watching them. Didn't see the bow chaser clear enough to be sure, Barbossa said, but that sloop is a dead ringer for the one who sunk me ship Cobra, and killed me little Polly. What son of Hades owns that hell-begotten ship? Jack grimaced. That's Caldunya, he said. It belongs to Borya Palinchnik, the pirate lord. Barbossa's eyes widened. Borya! Can't be! I've known him for years. I've gambled with him, gotten drunk with him more times than I can count. He wouldn't. Would he? Barbossa hesitated for a moment, then slammed his hand down the hilt of his sword. Damn me for a simpleton, he muttered, half to himself. The little butcher always did love gold, he added. The soulless little blackguard. Unable to think of anything to say, Jack merely shrugged. Borya favored sloops, liked vessels that didn't draw much, and could sail rings around bigger ships. So it all fits, in a way. He glared at the distant sloop. What fits? An all too familiar voice asked. Jack looked up to see Captain Teague standing there, with Don Raphael just behind him. Esmeralda was standing behind her grandfather. Barbossa began to explain, and Jack was happy to let him summarize the situation. Teague would certainly believe Barbossa, an experienced pirate and captain, long before he believed Jack. When Barbossa reached the end of the comparison between Caldunya and the ship that had attacked him, Teague said, This isn't proof of Borya's guilt. Just having a Bermuda-rigged sloop, even one with a brass bow chaser, proves nothing. It could be a coincidence. Jack, who had stepped back and was standing behind Barbossa, glanced over at Esmeralda and rolled his eyes. Seems like a far-fetched set of coincidences to me, Barbossa said. I'd like to look Borya in the eye and ask him whether he attacked and sank me ship. And do not forget old Tommy of the One-Tooth, Esmeralda said. What happened to One-Tooth Tommy? Barbossa barked. He was part of me crew. Jackie boy found him floating in the cove last night, Teague replied, face down. He thinks his death wasn't accidental. Barbossa turned and regarded Jack with eyes that seemed to bore right into him. Poor old Tommy. He never did get over that night Cobra went down. Sent him right round the bend, it did. He was always babbling about having seen the devil aboard that sloop. Is that what he told ye? Yes, Jack said. He was drunk, of course. Old Tommy was always drunk, Barbossa said. The man could climb rigging and reef canvas in a blow when he was 3 sheets to the wind. Never saw him sober. He told me he'd seen the devil that night Cobra sank, Jack said. But then he announced that he'd also seen him here in Shipwreck Cove. That's why I started looking for a Bermuda-rigged sloop. He took a deep breath. I think someone heard him talking about what he'd seen and killed him to silence him later that night. Barbossa and Don Raphael traded glances. Captain Teague, Don Raphael said, I believe what we heard just now justifies a search of Borya's ship. Teague's seemed normally impassive features tightened slightly. He glanced at Jack. What made you decide to go rowing out in the cove today, looking at sloops, boy? He asked. And how did you wind up with Don Raphael's dory? Jack took a deep breath, trying to think fast, but he wasn't fast enough. I loaned Jack my dory, Captain Teague, Esmeralda said. And when he told me why he wanted to row around, I decided I wanted to go with him. I'm glad I did. Jack wasn't the only one to get a good look at that brass bow chaser. I saw it too. I think Captain Barbossa has the right to ask some very pointed questions. Teague's glance flickered to Jack quickly, letting him know he wasn't off the hook. But when he spoke, he merely said, Very well. Don Raphael, Captain Barbossa, I would like you to accompany me. A short time later, Jack stood with Esmeralda, watching as Teague's heavily armed men rowed a longboat out to Caldunya. I wonder what they will find, Esmeralda said. I'll wager the contents of me sea chest that there won't be a brass bow chaser aboard that sloop, Jack replied glumly. Passing the spyglass back and forth, Jack and Esmeralda took turns following the progress of the longboat. When it reached the sloop, Teague stood up in the bow and within a minute or two was addressing Borya. Shortly after, the 3 captains climbed up the ship's ladder and went aboard. They were gone for a considerable time. At length they reappeared and climbed back down the ladder into the longboat, but this time they added another man to their party. Borya's with them, Jack said, looking through the spyglass. They're bringing him back here. Let me see. While she peered at the longboat, Jack studied the sky, then licked his finger and held it up. Wind's changed. It's picking up. Big storm coming. The longboat glided quickly through the water. Seeing that the longboat's destination was several docks away from the one where they tied the dory, Jack and Esmeralda ran to get closer. By the time they reached their destination, Teague and the others had already tied up and debarked. The keeper gave low-voiced instructions to his men, who scattered. Another armed contingent of Teague's men climbed into the longboat and began rowing out to the sloop. Jack guessed Teague had dispatched them to make sure Caldunya did not weigh anchor and attempt to flee. Teague led the other captains toward Shipwreck City. By now they collected an ever-growing crowd of curious onlookers. Jack and Esmeralda followed the crowd, trying to get closer, listening. Teague's apparently called for an official court of inquiry, Jack said to Esmeralda, low-voiced. Evidence will be presented to the pirate lords here at Shipwreck Cove. So things are heating up, and Jack leads Esmeralda to the great chamber, and they make their way inside. Then Mistress Ching, Don Rafael, Villanueva, and Teague enter along with Boria. Teague whistles, and we see a dog come running in with keys in its mouth. This is not the same dog as the one in At World's End, but it looks very similar. Teague takes the keys and unlocks the Piratic Codex, and then Boria's trial begins. Barbossa is called as first witness, and he recounts his story of the sinking of the Cobra. After that, Teague calls Jack as second witness, and Jack tells the story of what happened to One-Tooth Tommy. Teague asks if anyone can confirm the story, and Jack says both Kristoff and Esmeralda were there when Jack spoke to Tommy. But they notice Kristoff is not present here at the trial. But Esmeralda does confirm that Jack spoke to Tommy. Jack then recounts how he saw Claudunia today with the brass bow chaser. After that, Jack sits down, and Teague asks if anyone saw Tommy leaving the drunken lady. Someone in the back then stands up, and we see that it is none other than Ragetti, and he currently has an eye patch here, so he's lost his eye. Pintel is also sitting next to him, and we saw him a bit earlier. But Ragetti tells Teague he saw Tommy leaving with someone else. This mystery man was wearing a hat and a fancy turquoise coat. After all the evidence is presented, Boria tells Teague he is innocent, and he curses out Jack and Esmeralda for lying, which ignites Don Rafael, who leaps up but is restrained by Villanueva and Mistress Ching. Don Rafael says there is only one person who will know the truth, and they must summon him. They must summon Davy Jones. We find out the Pirate Lords are able to summon Davy Jones, albeit on rare occasions, only when warranted because of a pact the Pirate Lords of the First Brethren Court made with him. They vote on it, and they all agree to summon Jones. Teague orders Boria to be brought with him, and the pirates and witnesses must accompany him. But as they're making their way through the city, Jack tells Esmeralda he has never seen Davy Jones, which of course is not true since Jack met Jones in the Young Jack Sparrow series in Book 8, The Timekeeper. Of course, Crispin did not read that series when she wrote this, so it is a bit of a plot hole. But anyway, the group makes their way to Teague's ship, the Troubadour, and everyone gathers on board. So let's see what happens here. "Are we ready?" Teague said, and each pirate lord nodded assent. "Begin." In the flickering lamplight of the swaying deck, the four pirate lords spoke quietly, in unison. "Davy Jones, we, the pirate lords of the Brethren Court, call you. By our alliance giving us the power over the sea, binding the queen in her bones, we entreat you. Come to us, Davy Jones. We summon you. We summon you. We summon you." Through the open gun port to Jack's left came an eye-searing flash of lightning, followed almost immediately by a huge clap of thunder. Esmeralda started. Jack blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, Davy Jones was present, standing in a pool of shadow between gun ports. It was as though he'd always been there. Jack heard Esmeralda gasp, then felt her tremble. He put his arms around her, drawing her against him. The gesture was made in all innocence, seeking only to give and receive simple human comfort in the presence of something monstrous. Davy Jones was monstrous. Jack had seen some pretty weird manifestations in his life, mythical beings, ghosts, and eldritch creatures that seemed to have come from realms no human had ever trod, but none of them had prepared him for Davy Jones. That face, it was a face out of some opium eater's worst nightmare. It was as though a man had stretched the skin of a squid and thrust his face into it so deeply that the human features, eyes, nose, mouth, were molded through the sea creature's flesh. Tube-like tentacles writhed down from the lower half of his face in a bizarre parody of a man's beard. He wore a hat and ragged, once elegant clothing, but the garments could not disguise the fact that Jones's limbs were as distorted as his face. His right leg and left arm terminated in claws, like those of a lobster. His right arm ended in not a hand, but a writhing mass of tentacles. Only his booted left leg seemed human-shaped. There was no sound on the gun deck, save for the crash and boom of the storm outside. Jones stepped forward into the light of the lantern, his human foot thumping in its heavy boot, his claw landing with a click. Esmeralda pressed her hand to her mouth, but made no sound. Someone, Jack thought it must have been Villanueva, moaned softly. The tall, skinny Ragetti gibbered quietly. In a sudden rustle of skirts, Melinda fainted, collapsing onto the deck. The monster spoke. I am here. Jack listened to the voice with amazement. It was human. Jones spoke with a thick accent. Scots, Jack realized. Teague moved a step or two forward. Thank you for honoring our summons, Captain Jones, he said. We pirate lords face possible treason in our numbers. You are Lord of the Sea, so we know you will be able to tell us. The Keeper of the Code waved a hand at Borya, who was restrained from bolting by the guard's hold. Whether this man, Borya Palachnik, had been committing wanton slaughter on the seas, sending you many souls. Jones moved over to face Borya. Thump, click, thump, click, thump, click. He halted, leaning forward, tentacles writhing, barely a foot away from Borya, who cringed backward. Pale-faced, the brawny guards held him fast. Several of Davy Jones' facial tentacles stretched out toward the scrawny pirate lord, as if somehow they could scent him. Jones abruptly nodded. Yes, he said, turning back to Teague. He is the one. He has sent me many dead for more than a year now. He commands others. There are 7 captains under his command, and they all send me souls. Mercy is something they know not. Their ships bring only death. Don Raphael stepped forward. We thank you for your assistance, Captain Jones. Borya has broken the code, and yet he dared to dock his ship in the cove. We will send him to join you, and soon. Good, said Jones, biting off the word as if though the thought was a tasty treat. Jack had no idea he'd even moved until he found himself on his feet, only a few feet away from Davy Jones's back. In some ways, the back was as bad as the front, because the hood of the squid lay flopped over Jones's collar, pulsing gruesomely. Jack cleared his throat. Excuse me, Captain Jones. What about the brass bow chaser? He heard himself saying. What did Borya do with it? Jones whirled around. He moved fast for such a huge, towering figure. His eyes focused on Jack in a burning glare. Jack forced himself to remain still, feeling as though his soul was laid bare for those eyes to examine and sneer at. Who are you? Jones demanded. I'm Jack Sparrow, Jack replied, amazed that his voice emerged almost normally. I am a witness in this matter. Captain Jones, you know what happened to that cannon, I'm sure, because you know everything that happens in your domain. Jones nodded almost grudgingly, still studying Jack, seemed surprised that the young man had the nerve to stand there and ask him a question. You are correct, young Sparrow, Jones said after a second. Captain Palachnik's brass bow chaser now lies at the bottom of Shipwreck Cove. Thank you, sir, Jack said, finally allowing himself to back away. He almost stepped on Melinda, who was beginning to stir. He crouched down, helping her sit up. She took one look at Jones, then buried her face in her hands and didn't move. Don Raphael spoke up again. We all thank you, Captain Jones, for coming to us today, to help us find the codebreaker and traitor among us. We will deal with him and seek out the others who operate under his command. They are to be found on many seas, dealing death, Jones said, except for the other one who is currently present here in Shipwreck Cove. Another codebreaker? In Shipwreck Cove? Even Teague betrayed emotion, surprise and dismay. Aye, Jones said. That one sent me the one you called Tommy 2 nights ago. What is his name, Captain Jones? Don Raphael asked. He is not present, Jones said. If he were, I could tell you his name. I know only the ship he sails when he sends me dead. A fine brigantine. Jack looked up at Davy Jones, his breath catching in his throat. A brigantine? Lava Pear was a brigantine, and a fine ship she was. But she was just one of perhaps half a dozen such vessels currently moored or anchored in Shipwreck Cove. Jones can't mean Kristoff, he assured himself, and glanced over at Esmeralda, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her expression. Jack looked back at Davy Jones, just as the monstrous figure turned away from the humans. It took one stride. Thump. Click. Then between one moment and the next, Jones was simply not there anymore. Vanished. Gone. Teague turned to face Borya. Boris Palachnik, he said, this court of inquiry finds that you and your crew have broken the code of the Brethren. The code is the law. The penalty for all of you is death. The keeper of the code paused for a second, then said, This court of inquiry is concluded. Jack stood up, then motioned to the trembling Rigetti to assist Melinda to her feet. Walking back over to Esmeralda, he stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. He looked out the open gun port, seeing the sky was growing lighter. The rumble of thunder was now muted by distance. The storm was in retreat. Okay, so the Davy Jones voice was able to return for a little bit, so I hope you enjoyed that. But obviously the only error here is that Davy Jones doesn't recognize Jack either, but I already mentioned this plot hole before that reading, so I won't go over it again. But after that, we go back to present day with Jack on board the Wench. The rest of the voyage is uneventful, and the Wench returns to Calabar at the beginning of August, and it is blazing hot. Jack notices Mercer waiting for him again, and he tells Jack that Beckett has someone he wants him to meet. Mercer tells him that this will not be a social occasion, and he follows Mercer up to Beckett's estate just like last time. Jack asks for something to drink, and Mistress Goodright brings him some tea, and Jack is not a fan after he tries it. But Jack goes into Beckett's office, and Beckett wastes no time getting right to the point. He has a business proposition for Jack, and it involves Zerzura. He shows Jack the jewelry he got from Duke Renjon, and Beckett tells him the story of where he got them and what happened so far. Beckett believes that Jack will have better luck talking to Ayisha and getting information out of her. Beckett tells him that he will offer Ayisha freedom and escape in exchange for the bearings to Kerma, and if they are correct, Jack will receive 10% of the gold they find there. But that's not good enough for Jack, so he tries to bargain. So let's go back in the book and see what happens. Jack shook his head, his bargaining nature kicking in. Not likely I'd do it for that, he said. Think about it. I'd have to pretend to help her escape from Calabar, and it'd be a real escape once we leave your property. Risky thing, helping slaves escape. If you'll recall, slave hunters have large, fierce dogs, and they carry pistols. The slave hunters, not the dogs, Jack added. Then, after we leave Calabar, I'll be the one sailing around out on the ocean, trying to find an island the legends say is hidden by illusion, spells, and no doubt other unnatural and eldritch things. Jack shook his head. Dealing with eldritch things can be more than a bit risky, trust me. And all the while I'm out there risking me life, you sit here, safe in your nice office, behind your lovely ebony and mother-of-pearl desk, drinking tepid tea, safe as houses. He smiled back at his employer. 40%, Mr. Beckett. Beckett pretended not to hear him. And besides golden treasure, Jack, he added, this island will provide a new source of slaves. A whole island full of them. We wouldn't need those loathsome venal slave traders. Cut out the middleman entirely. The man who captured this party said they were armed with mostly bronze weapons, with only a few iron ones. No firearms. It'd be child's play to just swoop down and sweep them up. Black gold, Jack. It's a wonderful business opportunity. Cutler Beckett steepled his fingers before him, his eyes shining. Jack, the New World needs slaves. A black river will be pouring across the Atlantic for the next 100 years, or I miss my guess. Jack cleared his throat. What you do with the people of Kerma is your business, Mr. Beckett, but you know by now I have no interest in the slave trade. I'll stick to nice shiny yellow gold. He twirled the earrings again for emphasis. You wouldn't have to offend your delicate nose, Jack, Beckett insisted. Other captains will haul the wretches. You and I will just sit back and count our profits. Tell you what, I'll give you 10% of the slave revenue and 20% from the gold we take. How's that? Jack shrugged, careful to keep his features from showing his distaste. He tried not to envision fleets of EITC ships going out, trafficking in human suffering and degradation. You can keep all the money from the slaves, Mr. Beckett, he said. I'll stick to gold. Lasts longer and is easier to transport. 35%. Remember, I'm the one taking the risks. How much gold is there? Enough to buy my own ship and get free of you, that cutthroat Mercer, and your filthy slave trade, Mr. Beckett? That last part is just Jack's inner thoughts, by the way. Jack, Beckett smiled tolerantly at him. How exactly are you planning to reach Kerma? Flap your arms and fly like the Sparrow, your namesake. You'll sail there in my ship, remember? 25%. Jack considered. Is the lady I'm to charm young? He asked. Attractive? Beckett laughed out loud, but softly. Sadly, no, Jack, he said. I doubt there's a voyage long enough a man could take that would make that creature look attractive enough to woo. If you're not discerning, perhaps a bag over her head. He chuckled. No, I fear I can't offer the lady's charms as an inducement. How about if we compromise? 30% of the gold revenue for your share. Jack nodded. Works for me, as long as you throw in these baubles here. He indicated the jewelry spread out on the desk, just in case the treasure in the labyrinth turns out to be a low ebb. Beckett picked up the wristlets and twirled them. Neither of these is the right bracelet, Jack, he said. The book says the sacred talisman that unlocks the door is decorated with the head of a lion god, picked out in stones taken from the heart itself. Captain Ward doesn't say anything about where the talisman needed to unlock the door might be found. You won't be able to get into the labyrinth, much less the treasure room." Jack smiled. "There's always a nice charge of black powder, Mr. Beckett," he reminded his employer. "That should prove persuasive to just about any door." "Good point," Beckett said. "And then you'd only have the monsters and traps Captain Ward mentions to worry about." "That's why I deserve my 30%, Jack pointed out. "I've had some slight experience with eldritch things. 30% of the gold, and all your little treasure trove here," he said, indicating the tray. "Do we have an accord?" Beckett hesitated, then shrugged. "Oh, very well," he said, and held out his hand. "Done." Jack shook it. "Done." "Shall we have a toast to our lucrative partnership?" Beckett said. Jack nodded. "Suits me. I'm parched again." Beckett busied himself with glasses and a carafe at the sideboard, while Jack examined the jewelry again, piece by piece. Picking up the earrings, he slid them into the pocket pouch he wore beneath the waistband of his breeches, the same one he used to carry Tiadama's compass. He had another such pocket on the other side where he carried coins. Beckett came back to the deck and handed Jack a glass of wine. "A particularly fine port," he said, and raised his glass in a toast. "To finding Zerzura." "To finding Zerzura," Jack echoed, and sipped. "Presuming I do find it, and I choose to share the location with you." And that last part is Jack's inner thoughts again, just to make sure. But after that, Jack then makes a plan to meet Ayisha outside of Beckett's estate. If he is to be her savior, it must seem genuine and not forced. Jack also mentions that this should be the last time that him and Beckett speak together before he leaves, and Beckett makes sure Jack will indeed return. Jack reinforces that they have a gentleman's agreement, and just in case, Beckett mentions that he is the legal owner of Ayisha, and if he fails to return her or the wench, it will be classified as piracy. Beckett makes it perfectly clear that he is not to be double-crossed, as it will destroy Jack's reputation in more ways than one. Beckett then dismisses Jack, and we see that like she was before, Ayisha was listening on the other side of the door. So she knows about this whole plan for Jack to rescue her and everything. She also knows about Jack freeing a slave, since that story has spread through the Calabar slave community, and this intrigues her. But later on, Mistress Goodright asks Ayisha to go into town, just as Beckett planned. After she leaves, Mercer asks if he should follow her, continuing to call her a half-wit and a disgusting creature. But Beckett dismisses this and instead makes sure that Mercer is following orders. Orders to plant a spy aboard the Wicked Wench. Mercer tells Beckett the man's name is Samuel Newton, and he is an apprentice carpenter. This man will send reports to Beckett whenever the wench is in port, keeping him up to date with what Jack is doing or not doing. And then we go to the market where Jack and Chamba are waiting for Ayisha to arrive. Chamba had seen her earlier and is here to help Jack find her and also translate for him. Jack, of course, doesn't know Ayisha can understand English, but they see her and Jack makes a quick plan. A few minutes later, Chamba bumps into Ayisha carrying some yams and coconuts, and then Jack comes over to see what happened. He helps her up, he asks her if he can speak English, and she nods no, and Chamba translates for him. Jack apologizes for his sloppy crewmate, and sends Chamba to get her replacement coconuts for the ones she dropped. Jack is then able to escort her home, which of course is Beckett's estate, and as they make their way there, Chamba talks to her and tells her how Captain Sparrow set him free, but Ayisha says that no white man would help a slave unless there was something in it for him. Jack continues to show that he helped Chamba on his own accord, but they reach Beckett's estate and bid farewell to Ayisha for now. Jack gives her a day to think it over, and for the next few days, Chamba goes into the market to meet with Ayisha. Chamba then tells him that Ayisha will meet him tonight, and she needs him to promise her something before they can set sail. Later that night, they go to the meeting point, and Ayisha shows up. Jack then tells her that he wants to free her, and if he could, he'd free all the slaves everywhere. Ayisha asks what's in it for him, and Jack tells her he wants to find the lost island of Kerma. Jack tells her he had an encounter with someone who claimed to be from Zerzura. More on that later. Ayisha asks if it was a young man who looked like Chamba, but Jack says no. Jack then shows her some of the jewelry that Beckett found, and Ayisha says that the earrings belonged to the princess of Zerzura. Jack asks what happened to her, and Ayisha says she was killed by Duke Renjan. Ayisha tells him that she can feel if they get close to Zerzura, and that her home is hidden by illusion. We also see here that Jack is not too sure if he wants to give the coordinates of Zerzura to Beckett if and when he gets them. He does not approve of what Beckett wants to do there, and Ayisha then agrees to leave tomorrow night, but first they must rescue another slave, and this slave being Tarek. He is still on the Dalton farm a few miles south, and Jack reluctantly agrees to this. So the next day, Jack rents a horse, and we see that he is no good at horse riding. He rents a horse named Caesar, who is a little jumpy, and Jack struggles mounting him. He then meets Ayisha that night, and the two of them begin to ride up to the Dalton farm. Caesar goes a little wild here and knocks them off the horse, and this is where Jack finds out Ayisha can speak English. He waits for Ayisha to catch Caesar, and then together they ride to the farm. Jack waits with Caesar while Ayisha goes to get Tarek, and a while later Ayisha returns with Tarek, and the three of them make their way back to Calabar in the dead of night. Jack returns the horse to the stable where he rented him, and soon after, Jack brings Ayisha and Tarek aboard the Wicked Wench, where Robbie and Chamba are waiting for them. They set out while it's still dark, and they reach the Atlantic before the sun even comes up. All the while, Beckett's plan takes shape as Jack begins his voyage to find Zerzura. And that is the end of Chapter 9 and where we will end this episode. We are just under halfway through the book, and next time we'll be covering chapters 10 through 14. And then after that, we'll be covering chapters 15 to the end of the book, although I'm not sure if I extend this to one extra episode to cover the big thing that happens at the end of this book, or it could just be like a 3-hour episode for chapters 15 to the end. I'm not sure, but I hope you're all enjoying the coverage of The Price of Freedom so far, as I am geeking out about this, and I'm so excited to finally cover this book. Like, I've been talking about it, you guys know, I've been talking about this book on the podcast for so long, so finally covering it, and as we inch closer and closer and closer to that big defining moment for Jack, like, it's so exciting, I cannot wait to talk about it with you guys. We have some really exciting stuff coming up next time, so I hope you all join me as we continue to make our way through The Price of Freedom, chapters 10 through 14. I'll see you all then. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X and Blue Sky at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia, so make sure to go check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on Dashery. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.